Thoughts on the readings for May 12th: Deuteronomy 29, Isaiah 1, Acts 27. Deuteronomy 29 tells of the Lord's renewal of his covenant in Moab with his people Israel. Verse 1 informs us that the words of this covenant are in addition to the covenant made in Mount Horeb, i.e. Mount Sinai. From verses 2 to 9, Moses is summoning all the people to stand before him at the edge of the Promised Land to hear some final words to strengthen and encourage Israel before their entry into the land. The nation is reminded of their sovereign's blessings throughout the last 40 years. Notice in verses 4 they were told of hearing ears, this in contrast to what the nation later became, those whose ears were closed to the gospel message brought by the Messiah. Israel had been saved from powerful foes. In verses 10 to 15, Moses implores Israel to hearken to the words of the Almighty. The covenant that the Lord their God was making with them that day was of great import, and had to be faithfully observed in order to continue to inherit the land promised to their fathers. Verses 16 to 28, they are warned of dangers which could overtake them, and they might forsake the living God. We notice that verse 18 speaks of a root of bitterness springing up suddenly and preventing the nation from receiving what their God had graciously prepared for them. The writer to the Hebrews comments on this in chapter 12, verses 12 to 16. The nation is warned that idolatry remains an ever-present danger for them. Failure to keep the ways of their Almighty Creator will bring swift and decisive judgment. The chapter concludes in verse 29 with a reminder of the great blessings of God in revealing to His people the things hidden from those who fail to understand the truths of our omnipotent God. Isaiah commences his prophecy in the year that King Uzziah died, which is spoken of in chapter 6. This was the same year in which King Uzziah died and the year of the great earthquake mentioned in Isaiah 6, Amos 1 and Zechariah 14. The effects of this earthquake on Israel and the surrounding kingdoms were monumental and are part of the records of these nations. It was 786 BC. Verse 1 of Isaiah's prophecy tells us that Isaiah's prophecy continues throughout the rule of Hezekiah, and evidence within the book suggests that it lasted until Hezekiah's death. It was when Manasseh the king, Hezekiah's son, that he slew the prophet Isaiah. Recorded history says that Isaiah was drawn in two at the command of that wicked king, and the prophet may well have been the person spoken of by the writer to the Hebrews in chapter 11:37, making the period of his prophecy from the years BC 786 until BC 697. A total of 89 years of faithful service to his God. How remarkable is that? And what an amazing example for us. The chapter begins in verse 2 with an appeal to the heavens and earth to give heed to the words which will follow. This introduction is a quotation from Deuteronomy 32 verse 1 and find an exposition from the Apostle Paul in Acts 13. Ramsey tells us that the readings for that day in the synagogue at Antioch were in fact Deuteronomy 32 and Isaiah 1. The prophet Isaiah is not talking about the physical heavens and earth, as these cannot hear, but is talking of people who are rulers and those who are ruled over the earth. This is shown in verse 10. The wickedness of Judah is described in verses 2 to 20. The nation is spoken of as being contrary to our natural expectations. Animals obey their owners, children usually respect their parents. But, says the prophet, this nation did not show respect. This nation was incurably sick and would incur divine anger. The coming destruction would be extensive, and leave them like a flimsy cottage in a cucumber patch. The nation is compared to Sodom and Gomorrah and will so be judged. Their offerings were given with contempt, and was abhorrent to the Almighty. The nation's celebrated feasts were despised by their sovereign. Speaking for God, the prophet asked the nation to forsake their wickedness and listen to the Lord in order that he might find a course for forgiveness of their sins. That avenue for forgiveness has been provided to us, as our Lord Jesus Christ explains in Revelation 7 verses 14 to 17. Verses 21 to 31 is a lamentation about Jerusalem having become a pitiful and unfaithful city. Yahweh outlines the detestable deeds that were seen in Jerusalem for which God was holding them accountable. After these judgments, their sovereign will bring blessings and restore them to his favor, and verse 26 tells us that in the kingdom of our Lord Jesus Christ the city will be known for righteousness and faithfulness. This theme will be elaborated on in chapter 2 of the prophecy. Injustice and unrighteousness will be removed from this soon-to-be glorious city, Acts 27 tells of Paul's journey to Rome for his case to be heard by the Emperor Nero. The ship set sail in fine weather with only Luke accompanying the Apostle Paul on his voyage. The ship soon finds sailing difficult because of the opposing winds. When the ship reaches Crete, it has now become too dangerous for sailing, and Paul advises that they should stay in Crete until the winter passes. But the owner of the ship was determined to reach Rome as quickly as possible to receive his profit. The Roman centurion decides to accept the ship owner's position and to continue on their journey. The ship is now beset with a hurricane-like wind called Euroclydon. The crew takes many measures to try to save the ship and its precious cargo. Nothing works and their lives are entirely at the mercy of this horrible storm. All on board the ship become depressed and for 14 days eat nothing. Then Paul, after receiving a vision from an angel of God, takes control and encourages everyone. The apostle gives thanks to God and they all eat. After that, the ship is lightened by throwing overboard the wheat from the hold. There are 276 people on the ship. Some of the sailors pretend to let down anchors under the ship, but their intentions are to flee in the lifeboats. Paul says to the Roman centurion, Julius, that unless the sailors stay on the ship, all lives are in danger. Julius stops the sailors from escaping. When daylight comes, the crew run the ship into a creek which sees the rough sea smash the ship to pieces. All escape safely to shore, some swimming and others being carried by the current on planks of wood from the broken ship. Acts 27 verse 31 makes the nice point that unless we abide or remain in the Christ ship we cannot be saved. Compare John 15. Our fruitfulness and salvation is dependent on us abiding in the vine of God, His precious Son, our Lord Jesus Christ.